Welcome to our vibrant network of governance, risk, compliance, and cybersecurity leaders. We share cutting-edge insights, best practices, and innovative strategies to empower professionals in navigating the dynamic cyber threat landscape. Join Circolo de CISO to ignite resilience and data protection across industries.
We are going to be continuing our discussion on API security. So in the past two episodes, we spoke about the API security, the background to API security, and the common API security risks. And today, I've got with me Vaithi to continue our discussion. And today we will talk about the future trends in API security. Vaithi, welcome back again. And I would like you to continue the discussion and tell us what is the future looking like for API security.
I mean, I generally start with the statistics because I love numbers.
Yes.
So one of the prediction, particularly from a fintech perspective, the number of fintechs that we have globally is around like 30,000 plus fintechs. And on an average, a fintech has around like 10,000 to 12,000 APIs. I'm talking about a very small fintech. So now just imagine how much would be the number if there are like 30,000 fintechs, and that's as of now. So if you imagine like another 5 years down the line, so we could look at roughly around like say 60 to 70,000 fintechs, and each fintech approximately having around like 10,000 to 12,000 APIs. And just imagine the API explosion we are kind of looking at. That's point one. And point two is in terms of money transfer business. The cross-border money transfer business is already kind of exploding big time. And the World Bank has predicted that by 2028, the cross-border money transfer volume would be roughly around like say $23 trillion. $1 trillion we're looking at. Now add that number to the risk that we were talking about from an API perspective. So how much is at stake we're looking at? So from that lens, we just need to see how much of an importance that we need to give from an API security perspective, right? So that's one point I want to.
I'm just going to interrupt here. I just want to, give a context to the viewers. I would like you to reiterate what percentage is subject to design and testing of APIs, and then relate it to the numbers you're talking about in the numbers of API, right? So that the viewers will get the feel of the risk quantification we're actually talking.
Absolutely. I think that's a good point, right? So in the first episode, we were talking about the in terms of the percentage that is actually allocated for security in the overall API testing cycle. So we were talking about it's 4%, less than 4%, right? In terms of how much of time we actually devote towards particularly API testing. I'm not talking about the general system SDLC process, but particularly around the API lifecycle. So we only have or spend around like less than 4% towards security testing, and compare that to the numbers that we are actually talking about in terms of money transfer business. So that's the amount of risk that organizations are actually, especially from a risk appetite standpoint, that's the risk that they actually need to do. So they need to correlate with the numbers that they have on their balance sheet and see what's the risk that we are looking at. So that's very important. And the second point is there are a lot of discussions happening about the zero trust philosophy, and the zero trust philosophy even is absolutely pertinent from an API security perspective as well. So see to it that every user is someone whom you actually trust, or don't allow them to access your APIs or your platform without having appropriate authentication or authorization. And thirdly, see to it that your endpoints are totally secure, right? So that's very, very important. So from that perspective, what we also done, particularly from our organization NIAM perspectives, we have a shift left approach, a secure by design approach, where we actually have, we do have an API security standard. So we see to it that as and when APIs are getting developed, we see to it that it's going through appropriate review channels from the security team before it is getting moved into production. So this is something that's going to be the norm going forward. It is going to have a lot of weightage, and it's only based on the security posture of your company you're going to attract more investors on. Because nowadays, if you want to attract more investors, one of the core component of the due diligence performed by the investors is on cybersecurity. And inside cybersecurity, particularly if you are from a banking or a fintech circle, then API security assumes significant weightage, right? So how do you secure your APIs? How do you monitor your APIs? I think we didn't discuss more on this in the last session, right? Because it's just not about designing your API securely. It's also all the more important that you sufficiently log and monitor your API traffic as well, and that's a very pertinent Sujit. So that's some point. That's one point I just want to kind of reiterate on again. And I think we discussed this in the earlier phase also, in terms of how much of a compliance importance is being given, because you don't do this just for compliance, you do this for your own security. So that perception has to go, because currently if you look at it, people say, hey, do I need to do this? Is some compliance requesting for this? So don't do this just because some compliance is mandating you to do this. So you just need to ensure that security follows compliance and not compliance is following security. So that needs to be highlighted. And as I said, you know, treat every API as a software artifact or a software change. Ensure that it goes through the entire API cycle. Test your API as frequently as possible for vulnerabilities, and see to it that you address all of the vulnerabilities and fix them as soon as possible. Because the time that it actually takes to actually for a hacker to kind of get into your network is like less than 5 seconds to break an API and then get it. So the amount of damage that can be done, it's not about, we're talking about like 10 records missing, 20 records missing. We're talking about millions and billions of records that are at stake. And as I said, the best security posture that your company has, you get more investors, and that's the norm now. That's being looked at from an investor standpoint. Over to you, Sujit.
Not only from an investor's perspective, like when you really look at from a reputation perspective, your customers are going to stick around with you only if you demonstrate that you adhere to the best practices, you're compliant, and their information is kept secure. So that's the assurance a typical customer would expect from any organization. So I also want you to spend a little time explaining to the viewers. You did mention about shift left, right? So some of them may be aware of it, but you may want to relate it to our conversation and say, what is shift left and how relevant is it for API security? Why?
Absolutely. I think shift left is primarily to see to it that you don't address your vulnerabilities or defects in your application or API after it's moved to production, right? And one of the primary reason is because, one, it has a downstream impact from an availability standpoint. Secondly, from a cost perspective also, to kind of address these deficiencies, it becomes a bit tough for the management to cater to. So from that perspective, shift left says at the time when you actually plan, right, even before the design phase, see to it that you bring in all your security experts in the team and see to it, hey, this is the objective of me. Maybe we speak in context of an API. So this is what the API is supposed to do, right? And this is what we are planning to do. These are the data that we're going to kind of transfer to our client or to our partners. Right? So what is the risk that you foresee? What are the things that I need to be wary of before I even design the APIs? I think that's where it actually starts. So when you start doing this, the overall output is in much better quality. And secondly, from a governance perspective also, you don't push too much stress on the, from a governance or from a monitoring perspective, how it is done. Because in most of the organization, especially the matured organization, wherever the shift left approach is being there, the exploitation rate is considerably reduced from a hacker perspective. So that's something I want to reiterate on.
So what I'm hearing from you is, I'm actually, stuck on that 4% testing. So I'm still stuck on that, right? So I guess when you shift left, the chances are that you would increase from 4% to maybe 98, 99% of testing would be achieved. Now today, when you're
Absolutely.
doing based on your urgency, you develop a product and you push it to production and you are in a market. And today, the hackers, when they exploit, they are not going to come and tell you, hey guys, I got you or I got your data. So the trend today is harvest today, decrypt tomorrow, monetize it later. Right. So that's how they are going to go, right? I mean, this is not something I'm saying. I've heard this from the guys from the Visa, the MasterCard, and I guess all the security leaders are repeatedly saying the same thing. We may say that we got the data encrypted, but if there is weak authentication or if there are no authorization and there is excessive data exposure, someone who has broken into the API, they could read the data in clear text and requires no decryption. So that's like you punch a hole and you draw the water out. It just starts leaking. But if somebody grabs your database, then they have to put in a lot of effort to decrypt it. So you need to be mindful what exactly we are talking here, why we are talking about shift left, the importance of having your own standards based on the OWASP top 10 criteria, build it, implement it, train your developers, understand your data, what data is going to be accessed when, by whom, for what purposes, and more importantly, monitor the life cycle of your APIs because they also have a life. Right? Sometimes you may have to update and sometimes you may have to deprecate them. Right? So it can't stay in the production once it has to be removed. That's an exposure. So with that thought, Vaithi, thank you so much for sharing your experience and your knowledge. I'm not going to let you go that easily. So I'm going to invite you back to the next episode where we are going to be talking about impact of compliance requirements. Right? So how does APIs impact compliance requirements? You did briefly mention about APIs and security and compliance, but we would talk a little more in detail. And if time permits, we would also be talking about the emerging trends in the banking or fintech industry as to how the banks are evolving from physical to the digital space. So if time permits, we will be discussing that in the next episode. So keep watching our videos. Stay tuned. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe and follow us. And we will be back again with more information. Vaithi, thank you
Thank you,
again.
Sujit. Thank you.